What's the history of Russian successful and attempted coups? Shakespeare has the answers if you want them. Julius Caesar, Henry IV, Macbeth. Putin's government is a swirling competitive court. So what may that tell us? Now, to borrow a line from this TV series The Wire, when you come at the king, better not miss. Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
When, in mid-June 2023, Yevgeny Prigozhin's Wagner Group mercenaries began their coup and marched toward Moscow, the whole world awaited the reaction and response of Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. Prigozhin was clearly contesting his leadership and by doing so undermining Putin's position among the Kremlin's biggest figures. The coup failed, and not long after, in August 2023, a plane en route from Moscow to St. Petersburg exploded mid-air, killing all 10 passengers on board, Prigozhin among them. Prigozhin's tale, however, is, in Russia's case, only one of many. The country has a bloody history of swift and brutal attempts at seizing power at the Kremlin, most unsuccessful, yet not all. After Joseph Stalin filled the power vacuum left by Lenin's death, he quickly aimed at eliminating all opposition. In 1934, he initiated the Great Purge, in which 750,000 people were killed. Following Stalin's death from a stroke, which some say was caused by poisoning in 1953, his closest associates fought among themselves to secure the leadership position, with Nikita Khrushchev ultimately prevailing over Beria and Malenkov. The political scene of the Soviet Union was marred by such unofficial power shifts, and the trend continued even after the dissolution of the country and creation of Russia. Putin himself came to power in an unorthodox way. A former head of the FSB, he rose through the ranks of the central administration in Moscow and was named prime minister by Russia's then-president Boris Yeltsin, who later resigned before the end of his second term. After doing so, he named Putin his successor, who, after winning the state-controlled elections, never gave up power and has shown time and time again that he is not inclined to give it away easily.
I'm delighted to welcome back Zygmunt Jęczałowski, the founding editor of Open Democracy Russia. He's our guest today, so welcome along to the programme.
Always pleased to be with you.
Great to have you. We're going to start off with the textbook example, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the overmighty subject. His unit, Wagner, seemed to be very effective on the front in Ukraine. A very charismatic leader, you could say, a very brutal leader. What was his big mistake when he actually wanted to make the transition from being an employee into having the top job?
Actually, we don't really know what were his real intentions. If he really wanted to replace Vladimir Putin, or he wanted to remove his closest lieutenants and to become his sort of first minister. Or first military commander. But of course he underestimated the power of central power. He underestimated the feeling of danger he created among Moscow bureaucrats who could not tolerate this kind of rebellion. And he surrendered at some point. He sort of negotiated some kind of conditional surrender. And we don't even know if he believed that it gives him safety guarantee, that it's extension of his life, because he probably knew quite well how does it work in Russia. But at the same time, if he didn't negotiate this surrender that we remember on his way to Moscow,
yes.
he would have suffered serious defeat. They would have used all military power they had at their disposal in order to crush it.
He was very careful not to criticize Vladimir Putin directly, but to criticize his inner circle. The king is not the guy who needs to be replaced, but he's just being advised wrongly. That was his tactics.
We don't really know a lot. I know a few people who had opportunity to talk to Putin directly and even for extended period of time. one of his key economic advisors was economist Andrei Ilarionov, who is now very active in the opposition. But for the first 4 or 5 years of Putin's rule, they met regularly every second day and for extended periods of time. And Ilarionov explained to Putin how economy should be managed or what reforms are required. And I asked him several times, how was it? How if he was able to criticize some mistakes made by Putin or by his advisors, or how? No, he says it was very sincere, very open, and he listened carefully, and he wanted to learn from me because this was the beginning. It was 4 years, and I believe that there are some subject matters that Putin allows people who visit him to be pretty open-minded, but not about fundamentals. And fundamentals are his attitude towards Ukraine, his attitude towards Russia. These are things which they probably never be touched.
Yeah.
But let's say some technical things like how to allocate money to certain segments of the economy, then Putin is open to discuss it because he sort of believes that people want to advise him well so that it turns out better for him, for the country, for the regime and for the country. But okay, we can. I know what you want to know. If there are people in the elite who sort of would be capable of plotting against Putin and sort of no.
No, that's not. I mean, the power is centralized and very. It's naive for the West to hope that somehow in this inner circle of Vladimir Putin, there's going to be a successor. I mean, that's just a fanciful hope.
Look, I'm friends with a political scientist from St. Petersburg European University, whose name is Dmitry Travin, and I remember also discussions with him several times. He says, we have 3 conditions of stability of Putin's regime. And as long as they continue, there is no chance for any major chance. The first thing, there is no conflict within the close elite of power. Okay, the part of the elite, which are oligarchs, so-called billionaires, they may be a bit unhappy because they would be happy to spend their money in the West, but it's no longer possible to enjoy this kind of lavish lifestyle. But that doesn't mean that they would be able to revolt against Putin. The second thing is a mechanism of repression. Putin built pretty efficient machinery, police machinery of repression, and knows how to use it. And as long as this huge army of armed men willing to crush any peaceful meeting in major cities, as long as it remains loyal to Putin, he's safe. And the third thing, also very important, is there would be some kind of economic stability. In other words, Russia would not suffer this kind of economic collapse it suffered in the 80s and in the 90s. The Soviet Union collapsed also because there was dramatic economic crisis, maybe a little bit the same to what we suffered in Poland. But the Soviet Union suffered tremendously because their economy was oriented at military production, and it was no longer sort of needed. So they had to convert, and it turned out that converting a huge plant producing tanks into civilian production is not so easy, because if you sort of design huge plant to produce mortars or tanks or fighter jets, that's not possible to make washing machines out of it. Yeah. In other words, as long as there is some kind of economic stability, and Russia has economic stability, the all the revenue last year was very high, and higher than the previous year. So it's stable.
Is this the key factor in the failure of all these coups that have continued throughout Russian history? The Decembrists, 1820s, the assassination of the Tsar, the top guy, 1905 revolution happened. It succeeded in 1917.
1917 was a very special year because it is the result of the World War I. Russia wasn't particularly successful, and they suffered tremendous inflation, 1916 and 1917, and somehow people lost motivation to fight, to go on. There was Christmas truce between German and Russian troops, and they sort of fraternized. They sort of saw each other, and somehow these slogans resonated. We shouldn't kill each other. We should be brothers. That resonated, and Russian army lost capability. First of all, Russian generals no longer wanted to have Nicholas II and his wife. His wife was, by public opinion, believed to be a German spy because she was okay. So they were really unhappy with her. And there was this economic crisis with inflation, increase in food prices that led to demonstration in Petersburg, supported by the military elite, which led to, but this 1917, the February Revolution, which removed the Tsar, and October coup, actually it was a coup which brought to power Bolsheviks, which were minority at that time. This was sort of very, the world went upside down. You know, everything has changed, not only in Russia, but all over Europe. The war was about to end. The soon war was finished.
It was a perfect storm of.
And this was the same, conditions. The collapse of Soviet Union, more or less. It was an earthquake. The collapse of Soviet Union. People no longer feared of political repressions. They saw sort of with few years of perestroika, they sort of felt liberated. They spoke out what they wanted. The center of power lost instruments to control politics in the republics, and it sort of felt like a house of cards very quickly. So these are we shouldn't expect something like this at the moment. Maybe if Russia suffers defeat by the Ukraine, and if economic situation really turns into worse, they no longer enjoy support of Chinese or Iran or their North Korea, their totalitarian friends, we could see something dramatic. But as long as the situation continues as it is now, with Putin keeping power with his strong hands, if he steps down or if he dies, the successor will be chosen by the elite, and that would be some kind of house intrigues.
Yes, a court plot.
Yes.
I remember talking to a Russian oppositionist here in Warsaw a couple of years ago, and he was full of optimism about the defeat of Vladimir Putin. He said, right, we're going to get... In a nutshell, he said he was going to cobble together an army, and we're going to march from Ukraine, go to Moscow, and...
that could have been 2000. That could have been
that's a naivety.
In 22 when Russian army wasn't really doing very well on the Ukrainian front. But now the situation has changed, and we know that Ukraine is suffering serious problems, shortage of munition and shortage of men in the army.
Yes.
It's not very likely that Ukrainian troops would be sort of taking Moscow, occupying Moscow, the same as Poles did in the 17th century. And also, there was Russian opposition called on the Western government not to recognize Putin election victory in order to sort of, he's no longer legitimate president of Russia. Has anything happened out of it? Russian government, for foreign governments, Western governments, I mean, they understand that there is nobody else but Putin to negotiate anything with Russia at the moment.
Yeah, so even external machinations or interference won't have any
they
limited
do the same as they did under the communist power. They try to help financially and from organizational point of view Russian opposition or the media. That's essential. That's very important. It costs less than fighter jets to finance YouTube channel or television station. This is very important because somehow statistics say that they also have pretty large audience in Russia, especially young people.
Once more, we have to unfortunately wind up the discussion, but thank you very much, Zygmunt Jęciołowski, for coming once again onto our programme. Great to have you. So that's all we have time for today. Join me next time on How We Got Here.